welcome to the School of Business's Dean's Executive Lecture Series. The series will highlight highly accomplished, visionary, and internationally recognized business leaders. Tonight's event will spotlight Margaret Keane, one of Fortune's most powerful women and executive chair of Synchrony. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Dean of the School of Business, Dean Joya Bales, who will lead the discussion tonight. Enjoy the presentation, and I turn it over to you, Dean Bales.
Great. Thank you so much, Keisha. As Keisha said, my name is Joya Bales, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the Dean of the School of Business at Molloy College. I want to add my welcome to Keisha's to our inaugural Dean's Executive Lecture Series, where we will feature internationally recognized business leaders once every semester. This evening, we are very proud to present From the Call Center to the C-Suite, a conversation with Margaret Keane. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you.
Before we begin our chat, let me briefly share some highlights of Margaret's illustrious career. Margaret Keane is currently the executive chair of the board of directors of Synchrony, a premier consumer financial service company. She assumed this role just this month, so congratulations, Margaret, on that. Margaret's passion for emerging technology, innovation, and employee development has solidified her reputation as a top leader in financial services. She has been consistently recognized by Fortune as one of the most powerful women and American Banker as one of the most powerful women in finance. Fortune has also named her to the Business Person of the Year list, and she's been included as one of the most influential women in finance by Barron's. Quite an impressive list of accolades, Margaret. Previously, Margaret served as Chief Executive Officer and member of the Board of Directors of Synchrony, where she led the company's initial public offering in 2014 and its separation from GE in 2015. As CEO, she built Synchrony into a sustainable, innovative, and industry-leading business with exceptional culture. Through her leadership and vision, she created a workplace committed to caring, inclusion, and innovation at every level, while balancing the needs of all stakeholders. Under Margaret's leadership, Synchrony rose to 170 on the Fortune 500 list and was consistently named among the best places to work, the best companies to work for. During her 18-year career with GE Capital, where she led the retail card platform and president and CEO beginning in 2014, she later expanded her responsibilities in 2011 to become president and CEO of GE Capital North America retail finance business. Earlier, she held leadership roles that span consumer finance, vendor financial services, operations, and quality management. Margaret spent the first 16 years of her career at Citibank in various leadership positions. Margaret is dedicated to giving back to her community, something that is also integral to the Molloy College mission. As president of Synchrony Foundation, Margaret has been instrumental in building Synchrony's corporate citizen platform, and today helps oversees its work on moving those in need forward. She also serves on the board and is passionate about the work of Build On, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering urban youth to break the cycle of poverty, illiteracy, and low expectations. Margaret also serves on the Allstate Corporation Board of Directors, the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center's Board of Overseers, and Patient Care Committee. She works closely with the Business Roundtable, working to promote a thriving U.S. economy and expanding opportunities for all Americans through sound public policy. Margaret, let's begin with a question about your very impressive professional journey. Would you share with us your journey from the early years of your career to CEO and now to executive chair of Synchrony's Board of Trustees? How influential was your experience in the call center to your professional journey?
Well, it's a good story, at least for that, right? I'd say this. I think what was interesting about the call center is it was a job that allowed me to go to school and work at the same time. So it gave me a lot of flexibility. But I think what I learned there that kind of held through my career, and you can see it as, you see the things that I'm involved in, it really gave me a lot of empathy because I was actually a collector. So I was collecting people who were late on their bills, which is a tough situation. And it's interesting. I was hired back in, I'm going to date myself. It was 1979, I think, 1980, somewhere in there, where there was a bad recession in New York City, and they were looking for collectors to kind of, boost their teams. So, we were allowed to work whatever hours we could. We used to be able to make calls till 9 o'clock at night. So, I think what happened there is just empathy and learning how to deal with difficult situations. From that, though, I was working a lot of hours. I actually met someone who was running a group there and was actually early days of building models. And he asked me if I would help him out on weekends. So then I ended up working extra hours for him doing weekends. And, it turns out that he turned to be a influential person in my career because he actually encouraged me to join the Citibank Trainee program at the time, which was a 2-year rotational program that actually helped launch me in my career at Citi. So, I credit that part-time job to making that connection to moving. And then, I was in Citi for a number of years, held a number of big positions. And then, probably the other pivotal decision I made was actually, I would say when I was around 28-ish, no, 30, around there, I realized that to get ahead, you really had to have P&L responsibility. And actually, when you look at all the diversity studies, one of the things that they kind of come to a conclusion that it's really important that people have P&L capability. They've run something where they understand the economics of their business. So I actually took a step back to move forward. And it was actually a really good choice. I didn't know it was as good at the time, but it allowed me to kind of be viewed in a very different way. And then I was being talked to for very different jobs inside of Citi. And then I ultimately made the decision to leave Citi, predominantly because, to be honest, I was working crazy hours. I had just had my second child, which isn't easy, being a working mom. And, back in those days, we kind of had a baby, went and never talked about it again, and then went to work. So it was a very different work environment. And, I decided to take the big leap and go to GE, which was an enormous leap because I had a very good career at Citi. I was on all the right lists. I was moving fast there, but I felt like I needed a change and ended up at GE. And, that really is what allowed me to sit in the position I sat in by being able to take the company public.
Right. As you know, Margaret, there's a lot of students in the audience, so I think they'll be able to identify with working. Many of our students work part-time. And so I think it's inspirational that you never know where an opportunity will lie. And I think students also have to appreciate that. So there's all sorts of twists and turns that your career will take. So let's move on. What was the secret to your success and breaking through the glass ceiling? And what will you identify as pivotal moments on your career path?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple of things. I think one thing that I created kind of an image of and a reputation was to get things done. I think sometimes we underestimate hard work and just being a go-to person where people know if they have a problem or they need someone to run it, you become that person. Guess what? You end up very rarely interviewing for jobs in your career. They're usually coming and asking you. So I think this idea of really, pushing hard on delivery. I think the second, and I'd say there's some other questions where I'll reiterate this later. You have to be a leader who really can motivate and energize the organization, no matter what level you're at. So you want to create the ability to attract the best talent. And you really only do that if people really see you as an authentic person who's really going to help their career. So I think that's something I'm also known for throughout my career. And then lastly, I'd say, look, everyone talks about mentors. I had a million mentors. Most of them were assignments. It never felt natural. But what I would say made the difference for me was I did have someone who sponsored me. And I think there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And sponsorship is really that person who talks about your capabilities when you're not in the room and kind of pushes for you. And in one particular case, I had a vice chair at GE who really took me under his wing and really was my sponsor. And so, I know a big part of how I ended up in my career at GE was really driven by him hiring me ultimately working for him. And, I often tell this story. I was fairly new to GE. Jack Welch was chairman. I was in the boardroom getting ready to do a presentation to Jack, and I was in the back row. And the person who I worked for, his name was Mike, and he turned around and he saw me there, and he goes, "Come sit at the table with me." And it was such a subtle moment, but an incredibly important moment for me because it gave me a whole new level of confidence to say, okay, I can sit at this table. And I think all of us have that as leaders, opportunities to invite someone to sit at the table.
So never forget where you come from and help others along your journey. I think that's a powerful message. As I mentioned, there are many Molloy students in our audience this evening, and I'm sure they're interested in learning from a leadership perspective, what are the top characteristics that make a great leader?
Well, probably the number one is listening, right? I think the further you move up in the value chain of a corporation, actually, the less you know of what's going on day to day. So I think, and you got to be careful when you're the most senior person, like a CEO, people will a lot of times tell you what they think you want to hear. So you really have to make sure you have that balance of listening and being sensitive to what's really happening, not judging too quickly, making sure everyone gets a voice heard. Now, as a CEO, you ultimately have to make decisions, sometimes hard ones. But I think it's really important, particularly in these very challenging times, to have a team around you who knows that they're respected and that you listen to them. So I think that's really important. I think you need to be a problem solver. Nothing's easy today. Everything is hard. And so you have to be a natural problem solver. And, I always talk about this. I really don't like negative people because you could get negative really fast. Mm-hmm. I like people who think of a problem as a positive and try to figure out a solution. And I tend to surround myself with people like that. But if you're going to have someone who's constantly complaining, it just drains, it takes all the air out of the room. I think communication is critical. And I think this past year, with everything that went on, the pandemic, social unrest, I would say we had good communication processes in my company, but we had to up the game substantially and expand the audience. So it wasn't just our employees, it was the employees' families, it was the husbands and wives, it was kids. We did a lot of, support for the whole family of Synchrony, which I think turned out to be a great thing. But, when we were going through it, it was quite daunting, I think. And then, empathy, I think, having empathy and understanding where people come from, I think is really important. And I say you want to be able to when you listen, it's okay to change your mind after you get all the facts. So I think a lot of times people feel when they're in senior roles that they have to be the smartest person in the room. That's not true. You don't. If you surround yourself with great people, the smartest idea is going to pop up to the table.
Great. There's much commentary in the news today, Margaret, about the unique challenges that women face in business. So what has been your experience, and how important is it for women in business, and especially women leaders, to act as allies for not only one another, but for all genders, races, etc.?
Yeah, I'll start with the first one. I think it's always been tough for women, but I think this past year has really brought to focus the real challenges women are facing. I think, we've disproportionately lost a number of women out of the workforce. I think it's going to take us a while to get people back into the workforce. So I think there are fundamentals we have to really address, childcare probably being a big one. How do we set that stage correctly? How do we create, and I think there's a positive of the pandemic, a little more flexibility for people in terms of how they work. I think that's a big one. But I think right now we're at this very critical inflection point and have to make sure as leaders, we're really thinking through the impact COVID has had on women. And by the way, it's every field. I was listening to something this morning about women physicians and the challenges they face during COVID. It really, it's at every level that I think people are feeling this. So we got to amplify the voice of women. We have to really address some of the gaps that we have, and really drive that forward. Now, what was the second question? I'm sorry. The second question was?
And why is it important to help not only other women, but other genders and races, et cetera?
Look, I think this is just makes sense, right? I know for our company, we're a company that serves all types of people from all walks of life. And the best way you can serve your customers is being a reflection of who you serve. I also think when you have a diverse organization where you're getting different voices, you get better outcomes. You're more innovative. You get a perspective that maybe you wouldn't have gotten in another way. And I think we all learn from that, and things become better. And I think it's important that it's one thing to say you're diverse or you're driving diversity or you're looking to have a diverse team. This gets to the topic of inclusion, which is people have to feel like they really have a voice. You know what I mean? That they can really impart their thinking. Now, look, you're not going to always take every single idea, but I think people have to feel that sense that you heard them, you respected them, you listened to them, and then, you ultimately move forward. But, I think now more than ever, given the highlight of what the pandemic has brought out in terms of disparity in almost every aspect, whether it's economic, healthcare, I think we all have a role to play to really make sure we're lifting up folks across the country.
Well, you brought up two of my desk topics, inclusion and the post-pandemic work environment. And I think you've answered the question. I don't know whether you want to add to it, but you've been recognized as a leader and a model for inclusion in companies. And why was that initially such an important priority for you, Margaret?
Well, I actually, as someone who's come up the ranks, I know many times I was, for lack of a better way, the token female in a room. There's been many times where I've been shut down because I'm trying to say something and, I'm the only woman in a room and you get run over by, man speak, whatever, man talk, whatever that is. So there is this very important element of inclusion. So it's not just to say, oh, look, I have, a diverse group on my team. No, I have a diverse group where they have a voice in my team, where they feel that they're valued for their opinions and they're respected for who they are. That's very different than just trying to hit diversity metrics. This is much harder to do. This is really a cultural aspect of really, and look, I think we're good at it, but we're not great at it. We still learned a lot through the recent issues this past year that bubbled up. But I think being inclusive is a very different thing than just being diverse. And I think we all, as leaders, as people, have to hear more voices around what it really feels like to be left out. And, or being challenged or being ignored or whatever the right word is. And I certainly have a million examples myself. So I have a high sensitivity to it.
Yeah, I relate to your comments. On a personal level, I started in the investment banking field in November of 1980 at a firm called Solomon Brothers. I'm sure you recognize that. Yeah. So I'd like to think the world of work has become kinder to women. Is that your viewpoint?
No, I definitely think it's kinder. I definitely think, but it is interesting. I tell this story. Like when I worked at GE and I became the CEO, I felt very much inclusive in the culture of GE and all of that. It changed when I became a public CEO because there's just not a lot of us. And in some ways I felt like, wow, this feels a little bit like a step back. And it was just, I had to reset myself a little bit to say, make sure you're not feeling like you can't have a voice in this discussion. You know what I mean? And, because when you're the only diverse person in some cases, forget about other diversity, like you're the only diverse person in the room. it puts pressure on again, and you're at a different level, and people are looking at you. So I push forward on that because I think it's really important that my voice didn't get lost when I was being asked to participate. I made sure I participated, and I would say this is really important for people who are diverse. I think I talk to a lot of different people. Doesn't matter who you are. There is a little bit of hesitancy sometimes of maybe being in the room and being hesitant because you might be the only woman or the only Black person or the only Hispanic or the only Asian, whatever it is, to speak out or give your idea. You got to get over that, because the only way people are going to know you and know what you're about is if you speak. So if you're getting invited to a meeting and you're the only one in that meeting of whatever diversity there is, really think about that opportunity and don't just sit in the corner. I just think once you do it and you keep doing it, it's like you're going to get more comfortable at it. I'm not saying it's easy, because I know it's hard, especially as you're working up, your ranks or wherever you are, and you feel like you're the only person there, and everyone's eyes are on you. You just have to go for it, and don't hold back.
Very, very good words of advice for everyone, especially our students in the audience. One last question about inclusion. How does a company or organization know it has been successful in creating an inclusive culture? And how does one measure progress?
Yeah, this is one we've been grappling with, actually. And, we do work with, the great places that work. And, they're a group that actually works with Fortune. They have a whole survey process. They ask a whole bunch of different questions. We just ranked number 37 in the top 100, which is pretty good for a company of our age, if you will, in terms of coming out. They do have a metric that they're trying to pull together on inclusiveness. And it is around things like listening programs, programs for diverse individuals, development programs, mentors, sponsorship, all those types of things. So, I wouldn't say we have that metric figured out yet. We're still evolving. And so's Great Places That Work is actually trying to figure it out as well. So I don't think we have a perfect answer. What I would tell you, though, and this is where I think not having a metric, but having a culture, to me, one of the most interesting things that happened this year in terms of the company was when all of the social injustice issues occurred, we took like a pause in our company for 2 weeks. And we actually said, we're not going to, run out and say we're going to do all these things. We want to just listen to our employees. And I would tell you that the stories that came through, people shared their personal stories, which in many cases were heart-wrenching. I'm going to tell you. I don't think we would have been able to do that if we didn't have an inclusive culture. I don't think people would have been willing to share their personal stories. And in some of these stories, we have people saying, I never told my wife this story. I never told my boss this story. So opening that and having those dialogues for a couple of weeks, I think was, in my mind, one of the biggest measures of, we're at least headed in the right direction for sure on inclusivity.
So let's shift our focus to something we touched on before, the future pandemic work environment. Do you think the pandemic has changed how we work? And what do you think the new priorities will be in the workforce in the post-pandemic era?
So I definitely think it's changed how we work. And I think we're all trying to figure out what this looks like when we come back together. So I think what you're going to have is a workforce that just has choice and a lot more flexibility. So you're going to have people who say, I'm fine working at home. I want to work at home. At least that's how we're doing it at Synchrony. And then we have people say, nope, I want to come in, 3 days a week. So we're working through all that. I think where the really tricky part comes together, and I don't think anyone has the answer to this yet. Right now, we're all at home. So we're all on these screens, right? What happens when we come together and you have some in the office and some on screens? And we're going to have to really think through how we merge those two forms of communication together so that we don't somehow leave the people who are on, a webinar of some sort, out there and everyone in the room is talking. So I think we have a lot of work to figure out how do we bring that together. We as a company have also made a decision. We closed a number of sites, so we're going completely virtual. We felt pretty strongly that even though we might not have a physical presence in a particular city anymore, we're still going to create the ability for our employees to get together. So we think that from a cultural point of view, you still have to have the ability to bring people together and have those connections. We're a highly community-driven company, so we do a lot in our communities. We can't lose that. But I think, you know, as we come back together, you and I were talking a little bit earlier, you know, how do you deal with vaccinated and unvaccinated? What, you know, how do you bring these people together? So I think there's work to be done. We're going to do some pilots. But I think the piece that's probably the most challenging one is going to be what's the culture like, and how do you make sure you keep your culture moving in the right direction and you recognize you're bringing two groups of people together. It's going to feel very different.
I appreciate your comments that there has been some, not that many silver linings to this pandemic. I think one is that it's created an environment where flexibility is now an option for
Yes.
employees and for employees to maintain the life-work balance. I think there might be a more trendier term for it these days. I can't recall what it is now. Margaret, I
think I'd add one other thing. I think the other thing it does, and I think this is a big positive, it takes away the barriers of having to ask people to move. So I would say in our company, we would probably require, like if there was a job in Stamford, Connecticut, and you were living in Atlanta, Georgia, we'd say, no, the job's in Stamford, you have to come here. Now, it's much more expensive in Connecticut. You know, you have little children in school, maybe a spouse, you know, that you rethink whether you really want to do that or take that opportunity. So I think it's going to open up a lot more opportunity for people to be able to do more jobs from their house or their location and not have to worry so much about having to pick up and move, which creates a whole new pool of people, both internally and externally.
Right. And from a corporation's point of view, you're going to get probably, as you said, a better pool of candidates and probably a better person in that position when the pool is expanded. So
yes,
again, one of the silver linings. Margaret, I mentioned before that I have 3 daughters who are just starting their careers and dream about becoming business leaders. What advice would you give them and the students in our audience who want to jump ahead to a C-level role? What kinds of courses should they be taking? What kind of skills should they should be trying to acquire?
Yeah. So look, I think what I would say is whatever your major is, you really need to become an expert at it. So if it's finance, you got to be an expert at finance. If it's IT, you got to be an expert at IT. I think too many times people want to move too quickly. You have to create a toolkit of skills in a particular function to start your career. You have to earn a reputation that you're going to get the work done, that you're delivering. That doesn't mean you can't switch and go to another area, but you first have to start out and do your I don't know what the right word is, your work in that area for a while before you jump to something else. I feel a little bit sometimes people want to get promoted a little too quickly. You know, you have to earn your stripes a little bit. I mean, that's just the fact of life. So I think, making sure you drive and get those skills, I think is really important. I think I'd recommend, in my career, I took the job a lot of times people didn't want, so take a job that you're going to get kind of highlighted out of the group, right? It's the hard job. It's the one that, the company initiative. It's pick a topic where you're leading. You're going to get noticed. And I think as you're moving up, after you get those skills, you want to try to set yourself to sometimes just volunteer to do something so that your name gets out there. I think that's another big thing I would highly recommend. The other thing that I would say, and this I think is critical for this generation coming through, this generation is afraid to ask questions sometimes. the dialogue isn't always there. You know, they're very used to texting. And I'd say my advice is, particularly as you go out for your first job, no one expects you to know everything. No one. You have to be able to create the environment where you can ask questions and learn. And it's okay to make mistakes. Like if a mistake, you learn from mistakes. So I think there's a sense of tentativeness in this generation of maybe admitting they don't know something or afraid to ask questions. And I would just say to you, ask questions. People like to help you. Most people want to help people. So don't be afraid to say, you know what, I need a little more clarity on this. Can you help me out? And I think in this virtual environment, it's really important you do that because you may not be in an office environment where you could just like lean over someone's cubicle and say, hey, do you know how this works? So it might actually feel like you're stepping out a little further because you have to, you know, call someone or text someone or email someone for an answer. But don't sit there and not ask those questions if you're confused. And I see this a lot. I think people come in thinking, we think you have to know everything, and we don't. You're going to learn on the job. That's why you get hired. That's why you join, you know, the programs that are out there. So, you know, work hard, learn your skill, ask questions, be that person that people want to have on their team, you know, and volunteer for the things that are maybe not as visible or important in your mind, but actually give you a lot of visibility.
Excellent advice. I know in my 40-year career in higher education, many students have asked me, you know, what's the key to success as a young person? And you've said both of them, hard work and enthusiasm. You're not going to be the smartest person in the room when you enter a company, and you wouldn't want to work for a company where you're the smartest person as a young person. You want to work for people who are going to be able to train you and give you the skills you need to succeed. So another question along those lines, how do you see business evolving, and how should our students and alumni who are also present tonight prepare for this unique environment that lies ahead?
You know, I think it's going to continue to be a unique environment. And, you know, I was on a call, I guess a week and a half ago, which kind of surprised me a little bit, where the view is we will not have herd immunity till 2022. So we're still going to be in this bit of a hybrid approach. Now, hopefully by 2022, we kind of move forward. So I think that you have to have patience. I think you have to make sure, I think this is really critical. It's really easy to get lost in the shuffle, I think, when you're not in the office, right? So I think you have to make sure you're having those right connections, those right meetings, those right touch bases, you know, not only in a group setting, but even one-on-one, because otherwise you could get lost. And I think one of the things you don't want to do is get lost in this, and you want to make sure whoever you're working for or wherever you're working really understand what you're doing, you know, what you're involved in, and that you're not just, you know, sitting in the background handing in the assignment. Because if that's what's happening, I think you're going to get lost in the shuffle. So I think it's really important. This really gets to communication and staying engaged. And the other thing I'd say, you know, for all of you out there who are, you know, entering the workforce, whatever, it's really important you understand how your company makes money, where they make money, what value can you bring to the company. Doesn't mean you're going to be making millions of dollars, but your role how does that fit into the goals and objectives of that company? Really important to understand those things, because, you know, we all go to work, we all get a paycheck, but you also want to have a fulfilling career. And if you feel like you're really adding value in that company, you're going to feel better about your job. So I think that's important.
Thank you so much, Margaret. This has been a very informative evening, and it's not over yet. We appreciate your candor and your willingness to share your experiences, especially with the students in the audience. I'm going to turn it over to the Master of Ceremonies, my colleague Keisha Chandler, who is going to monitor the questions in the chat. Thank you, Keisha. Muted.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Dean Bales. This has been a really awesome discussion, and we do have a couple of questions and even comments in the chat. The first question that I have is, can you talk about what you learned from GE and Citi and how that played to developing your culture at Synchrony?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'd say, both GE and Citi had very distinct cultures. Citi, when I was there, I'm not saying this is how it is. It was a bit of a survival mentality. Like you got in there and it was really survival of the fittest. I used to say that when the leader changed, there was like regime coup changes, so I always felt at Citi, I had to rebuild my career and my name almost every, 18 months because there was so much movement. It was very different at GE. GE was a very stable, very consistent company, but definitely, on the more aggressive side. It was it was GE Capital. It was known as a debating kind of culture, which, I think in general for women don't like debate that much. So I had to learn that skill of really, having my facts and getting in the middle of the discussion. So I think my level of confidence really went up as I approached working for GE. So I think as I went to create Synchrony, I wanted to make sure that we were taking the best of GE with us, but also recognizing that we weren't a big company. We were a small company compared to GE. And, we weren't going to be able to be, for lack of anything else, the big guy at the table negotiating, right? Because we didn't have that kind of clout. So we had to really address, an adjustment inside the company to say, okay, how do we do deals? How do we look at ourselves in the marketplace? Because we're not GE anymore. And so we had to really, what I would say, we had to soften the culture a bit, because when you're the big guy in the room, you could push a lot of people around. When you're brand new with a brand new name, with a brand new CEO and leadership team and all of that, you have to approach this very differently. So we spent, as a matter of fact, we did the IPO in July of 2014. In September, I pulled the team together, say, look, we're going to go offsite and talk about culture. They were all like, what are we talking about? And, I was like, look, guys, we got to figure out who we at Synchrony want to be. And so we created values. We came up with we came up with a purpose. We came up with values, and we had values that were very consistent to who we were. And then we even had values that were aspirational, to make sure that we were pushing ourselves. And those values still hold today. We've gone out a couple of times to kind of vet them with the entire organization, and they still hold true. But, and one of the values is caring, as an example. And I think caring came totally through in this last year.
Thank you. Do you think women who work in an environment surrounded by men need to outperform men who are on the same level on the organizational chart?
I think we do anyway, so I'm not so sure that's like a question.
I absolutely agree.
All the time, but that's just me.
I'll second that.
You know what I think? It's not a question of outperform, because I do think we actually work really hard and do in many cases outperform. I think it's this question of gaining confidence. So what I often talk to women about, and look, I've had it happen to me, so I'm not saying something that didn't happen to me as well. We kind of have this little voice in our head that, that imposter syndrome thing, like, how'd I get here? Why am I here? I don't think I should be here. We all have it. And men just don't have that. They just do not have it, which is good for them. But we have to figure out how to shut that little voice down, because the reality is we're just as good, and if not better in some cases. But I do think we create this little thing in our head that actually holds us back,
Mm-hmm.
And I joke about this, but it's true. When I didn't plan on becoming a public CEO, I'm now a public CEO. I'm driving to do our first earnings from, my house to our office. And I'm in the car thinking, like, how did this happen? Like, how am I like the CEO? Like, what if I screw this up? I'm like going through all these emotions, and I'm like, okay, stop that, and kind of, you're going to be fine. So we all go through it, but I think women are much harder on themselves. much, much harder. And it gets in the way of their success sometimes.
Yes.
Margaret, you're reminding me of Sheryl Sandberg in Leaned In. She talked about that a lot. And, I appreciate your modesty to say that you have those moments too of self-doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the key takeaways that I took out of some of the things you said is be brave and have courage. I think you had said that earlier that if we're invited to the meeting, we just have to step up. So I think we need to be reminded that we just have to keep practicing and be
Look, if
brave.
someone's asking you to be at a meeting, they're asking you to contribute. And if you're sitting in a meeting and don't say anything, you're losing the opportunity. That's like a lost or a missed opportunity. Now, you want to make sure you know what you're talking about. So I don't want to just talking for talking's sake, but I'm sure there's 2 or 3 things in your head that you're like, and you're just like, I'm going to just let it go. Like, don't let it go and work at that. And there are people who are really extroverts and suck the air out of the room. And then there are introverts. I pay attention to introverts. So when I look around the room, I will say, so what do you think? And I think as you move up or you're sitting in a room, just be cognizant of the people who haven't said anything and say, do you have a view on this? What's your thoughts? Try to invite them in to share.
Thanks. And then the next question we have is, you did talk about mentorship a little bit and the power of sponsorship, but can you speak to the importance of having a mentor?
Yeah, I'm kind of mixed on this one, probably a little bit. I think because when I was coming up, there were not a lot of women. We were always given mentors. And in many cases, I didn't have any connection with this person. So it was hard to really connect, right?
Yeah.
I think what I would say that has worked for me is, my pool of what I would call advisors, people that I highly respected in both, Citibank or GE or even, Synchrony, people I respected who I would go and say, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm thinking career-wise. What do you think? What do you think the next step is? So I leveraged it that way versus a assigned mentor. Sometimes what happens with assigned mentors, it becomes too programmatic. And I think it has to be a fluid kind of discussion. And, I've mentored a lot of people in this advising way where, people have said, can I come and talk to you? And, when you say that, you have to talk to them about clarity on what's on your mind. You can't just expect the mentor to give you all the answers, right? You have to kind of have a view of yourself. So I'm more of a get that group of advisors around you, people you respect. Because mentorship doesn't have to be 7 meetings. It could be, look, I'm making this. I want to work in data analytics, a big area now, right? I want to work in the data analytics group. So who is in that group that I know that I can go have lunch with or coffee? I guess we can't do that yet, but we will. And sit around and say, here's what I'm thinking. What do you know? So that's mentorship in a different kind of way. And I view that as much more natural.
Right. And then our next question is, do you have any advice for high schoolers on how they should put themselves in that right direction?
For high schoolers, what I would say for high schoolers is, look, you got to get good grades. You got to have that right resume going to college. I would say, I'm a big believer in going for degrees that are going to get you a job. So I think sometimes what happens is we get on a path where it sounds like something I like, but is it really going to get me a job? So I'm a big believer in if you're doing finance, you're going to get a job. You're doing accounting, you're going to get a job. Data analytics, you're going to get a job. But what else? I don't know. If you're going to be
how about extracurricular activities?
My daughter's fiance is an archaeologist. My daughter will make more money than her fiance who's an archaeologist. I can guarantee you that. Brilliant guy, smart. But these are things. Look, I think it's always good to have those things, but they need to be real. I think they have to be something, not to just check a box. I think people read through that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Margaret, if I could just ask another question for the students in the audience. When you're hiring a recent college grad, what do you look for on the resume and in the
Well, the
interview?
first thing we do, we look at GPA. We do look at GPA because, it is a screen. Like it's not a perfect screen, but it's a screen. So we like to hire people with 3.5 and above. Not to say we won't go lower, but we don't usually go too far lower. There's enough candidates out there at 3.5, so that's a screen, right? I think the second is a little bit of what people talked about. It's what did they do while they were in the university? What extracurriculars? What kind of leadership? We look for leadership. Leadership is an important aspect no matter what job you're in, right? So we look for natural leaders. Someone, I know it sounds silly, but look, these are jobs. Someone who led fundraising for their fraternity or sorority, or someone who, did XYZ for the university. I'm a big believer in what I'll call extra activities kind of develop you in another way. And you learn a lot as a student, whether it's budgeting or things like that are going to be very useful for you when you end up in the real working world. These are skills that are real skills. So, we look at things like that. But I'd say we start with GPA and then interpersonal, and leadership capability.
How about technology skills?
Well, technology, we're always hiring. I'd say we have university level programs where we partner with UConn in particular. We have 2 big programs with them on the IT front and the University of Illinois. So we actually try to hire right while they're in college. So they'll work for us in internships while they're at college, and then we'll usually bring them on that way. I'm not saying we hire everyone that way, because we hire developers from other places, but I think the 2 areas that are extraordinarily hot now are people who can code and anyone who can do data analytics, AI. Cyber's the other one. Cyber's very. Those are the 3 areas that are really, hot. And, what we've decided is we're better off growing them ourselves than trying to compete with Google. So we try to work from university up.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we at Molloy have recognized that those are the skills, data analytics, technology skills, cybersecurity. And so we're looking to infuse our curriculum with more of that. So
yeah,
hopefully
I think on the technology front, I just would add a piece. I think, I would argue that technology is becoming embedded in every process. So, whether you're a finance leader, a operations leader, a marketing person, somewhere in there, whether it's AI in terms of really using the data a certain way, or the technology itself, it's really being embedded in almost every function now. So, I think if you can, and want to add extra skills to yourself, if you could figure out how to code, even though that might not be your first job, it's actually a skill that's worth understanding and thinking about.
Yeah. Very good advice. And then we have one last question. As an aspiring C-suite exec, what advice would you give a working mother on work-life balance in order to successfully provide for her family and while building a prosperous career? And that goes for, in person and virtual.
Yeah, I think this is what I always tell people. It's really hard to have the perfect work-life balance. Okay. So I think everyone has long careers. And I think what I always say is you have to have things working at home before they can work at work. Mm-hmm. So, and it's okay to take time to do what you have to do during, the early childbearing ages, and take your time off and spend time with your son or daughter. It's fine. I think, back when I was pregnant, you got 6 weeks and that was it. So I come back to work. I think your career is long, so you have to get that right and you have to feel comfortable. Now, with that said, as you move up, it does get harder. So, you need to have the right support system in place. And that's where, childcare and things like that become a really incredible asset. I mean, I was very lucky and my mom came to move in with us. Now there's other challenges with having your mom live with you, but I would say the burden of, my kids was taken off, because I didn't have to worry about a lot of basic things, but we gave up a lot of privacy to do that. So there's no perfect answer. And I wouldn't say there's one answer for everyone. And you go through different parts of your career where, when they're really little, they need you. Then they get into that good elementary school year where it's really just a matter of after school activities, which become hard. Then they become teenagers, which is another challenging couple of years. You get through that. It can be done. I would tell you, it can be done. But, you need to have the right support system, and whatever works for you, you need to have the right support system.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thank you to your team as well as Dean Bales and everyone for attending today's webinar.